I'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar series of the Cybersecurity and Information Systems Information Analysis Center, CSIAC. Today's presentation is entitled Stir, Shaken, SIP to Stop Robocalling. My name is Steve Warzala. I'm the CSIAC Outreach Manager. A few administrative notes before we begin. First, all phones have been muted except for the presenters. Questions may be asked at any time during the presentation by utilizing the chat function, and time permitting, your questions will be answered at the end of the session. Today's briefing slides will be posted on our website within a few days. And finally, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank our sponsor, the Defense Technical Information Center, DTIC. The funding that DTIC provides enables CSIAC to conduct these webinars. My pleasure to introduce our presenter for today's webinar, Ms. Daksha Bhaskar. She is the Senior Cybersecurity Architect at Comcast. Daksha has over 15 years of experience in technology development and business management. She's been responsible for developing complex solutions, architectures, and security systems. Her work spans carrier-scale voice, video, data, and security solutions. She previously worked at Bell Canada, where she developed their cyber threat intelligence platform and was involved in secure cloud deployments. She holds a MS degree in computer systems engineering and an MBA in electronic commerce. She contributes to security standards development and maintains an interest in security research, analysis, and authorship. I will now turn the presentation over to Ms. Bhaskar. Good afternoon, Daksha. The floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Steve. And I'd like to request us to listen to the clip. Let's take a listen to this.
Hello.
Congratulations! You've been selected to receive a free cruise to the Bahamas. And like most cruises, all of the expenses are included. All we would like is for you to participate in a short survey. You are receiving 2 free boarding passes for an all-inclusive cruise to the Bahamas.
Well, congratulations on being awarded the complimentary cruise.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Stir, Shake, and Sip to Stop Robocalling. And congratulations on winning a free cruise to the Bahamas. Now, John also received this call and was very excited. He decided to make a family vacation of it. So he purchased 2 additional tickets for his children and bought all kinds of upgrades. He updated their cabins, added food and drinks packages, all kinds of activities so the family would have a perfect time. John gave the trusty travel agent their social security numbers, their credit card details, and passport numbers. The travel was booked, and John was all set. A week before departure, John called the trusty travel agent, and to his dismay, the telephone number had been disconnected. The company had folded, and John had been scammed out of nearly $10,000. Now, John is not alone in stories like this. In the U.S., there were about 4.7 billion robocalls placed in the month of May alone. That's 1 month. That's an average of about 14 robocalls per person. Does that sound about right based on the number of robocalls you're getting? Maybe more, maybe less. So about half of those, a little less than half, 44%, were scams. And an estimated $10.5 billion was lost by Americans to phone scams in 2018. So why has technology not addressed this issue? As you can see, it's complicated. Well, not all robocalls are bad. And then there's caller ID spoofing. And let me explain. So when ET phones home with a pre-recorded message and repeatedly dials your number without your consent, that's illegal robocalling. And when you see ET on your call display, but when you answer, you get Mr. Dog on the line, that's caller ID spoofing. Now, not all robocalls are spoofed, and not all spoofed calls are robocalls. And then there are legitimate uses for both robocalls and caller ID spoofing. Doctors, lawyers, private investigators routinely use caller ID spoofing to protect their privacy. And then you have things like weather alerts, public announcements, appointment reminders, school closure notifications that may use both caller ID spoofing and robocalling. So this makes it really challenging to discern, for technology to discern the difference between an illegitimate robocall and a good call, and then block only the bad one. It was not that long ago that our emails used to be clogged and cluttered with junk mail. But we have become quite a bit better at cleaning out our emails. This is because emails can be dropped on servers, analyzed and cleansed before delivery, and you can apply keyword filters, blacklists, and advanced analytics. Voice, on the other hand, is a real-time service. It does not lend itself to being analyzed before delivery. And even if you could analyze it, there's very little preceding information. You may get time of day, maybe telephone number, which may or may not be spoofed. And we have such a sense of privacy about our phone calls that we wouldn't stand for anybody eavesdropping on our call content before it was delivered to us. The robocallers are quite relentless in their quest for financial gain. And there are several models for this. First, hire a robocall service. This is a very accessible service. This is easy to set up. It's technically easy to set up, and the price point is really feasible as well. It's really accessible. I would encourage you to check it out on the internet. The biggest pot of money they make is, of course, from scamming victims, and it is in the tune of billions of dollars, and we just discussed that. There is a third model, and it's one of micropayments, and it's a rather interesting one. In the US, we have caller name or CNAM databases that are managed by third parties, not service providers. Each time a phone call comes in, a service provider turns around and looks up the CNAM database to retrieve the caller name associated with the telephone number that came in. Each time the service provider looks up the CNAM database, the service provider pays the CNAM database owner a small amount of money. It's a micropayment. In the summer of last year, there were numerous articles and publications that came out suggesting that there was a revenue-sharing model between the CNAM database owners and robocallers. This means that robocallers are now incented to call simply to trigger the service provider to look up the CNAM database so that money changes hands and robocallers get paid. Essentially, robocallers make money even when you don't answer your phone calls. All it takes is for the service provider to look up the CNAM database. It's not a lot of money. It's about $300 for 100,000 phone calls. It's slow pennies, but steady and reliable income. Think about it. It's as simple as downloading freeware, hooking it up on, putting it on your laptop, hooking it up to the internet, setting it up to auto dial thousands of telephone numbers per hour. And there you have it. So, illegal robocalling is the #1 consumer complaint in the US, UK, and Canada. And consumers are routinely scammed out of their money. While consumers say that telephone is their preferred mode of communication, their trust in the services are eroding, and they answer their phone calls a lot less. In retrospect, about 70% of consumers say that they have missed important phone calls as a result. Businesses, while they use numerous modes of digital communications, still interact with their customers via the telephone. And businesses say over 80% of their business calls go unanswered. And to make things worse, when robocallers impersonate them and scam their customers, businesses take a hit to their brand name and reputation. And it gets even worse. When attempts have been made to block illegal robocalls, business calls have been flagged as suspicious and blocked as well. So businesses are really unhappy with the situation. Illegal robocalling, of course, costs service providers. It's power, bandwidth, infrastructure, throughput that is much better allocated to some other revenue-generating service. So illegal robocalling simply costs service providers, and they would love to see it reduce and go away. So at this point, robocalling has gone past simply being a nuisance. It's into the domain of serious business revenue impacts. And as we move from TDM analog services to VoIP environments, the global VoIP markets are forecasted to grow to $190 billion in 2024. And surely, we can't afford to have a third or a half of that to be attributed to illegal robocallers and scammers. It's time to do something about it, and we have a solid business case to do so as well. So Stir Shaken is not about your martinis, and I'm sorry to disappoint. It's still Tuesday and in the afternoon, so definitely not about martinis. So one of the reasons robocalling has been as challenging to stop is caller ID spoofing. And this makes it really difficult to validate the origin of a call. Stir Shaken addresses exactly this issue. So in the past several years, pretty much everybody in the industry, all of the stakeholders, you have standards bodies, telephone operators, service providers, policymakers, they've all come together to develop a call authentication call validation solution. STIR, which is Secure Telephone Identity Revisited, is a standard of protocols used to implement digital signatures for telephone numbers of calling parties. Shaken is simply a framework used to implement STIR. When protocols are implemented in networks, there tends to be variations in implementations leading to interoperability issues. And in the US, we have about 3,000 service providers. So that could be a lot of interoperability issues. So Shaken simply prescribes policies and guidelines to service providers and equipment vendors on how to implement STIR. But most importantly, Stir Shaken now provides us with a mechanism for real-time authentication of telephone numbers that will help us address the problem of illegal caller ID spoofing and robocalling. So the telephony landscape is a complex one with numerous technologies and various players. A telephone call could originate from a plain old POTS line, could come in from a VoIP phone, could come in from a PC, a tablet, a VoIP client on a mobile phone. It could be a single line, could come in on a PBX, and there could be just as many variations on the terminating side. When the point of origin and the endpoint of a call are not serviced by the same carrier, you might have intermediate service providers and networks. And depending on if the call is regional, national, or international, you will have multiple intermediate networks and service providers. All this to say that the telephony landscape is a complicated one with numerous players and technologies. And over the past decade, we are seeing steady migration from TDM analog technologies onto the IPsip environments. And reports have it that about half of the suspect illegal robocalls originate on IPsip networks. It so follows that Stir Shaken is focused on IPsip technologies only. So the solution we're about to discuss, Stir Shaken, the scope is IPsip. And the rationale for that is that it's seen as the way of the future from a technical evolution standpoint. So here is a high-level conceptual diagram of the Stir Shaken solution. Imagine that Bob wants to call Alice, and they both have SIP endpoints. Bob's user agent creates a SIP invite, inserts his telephone number in the header, and forwards it to the authentication server for his domain. The server authenticates Bob and checks to see if he is authorized to use the telephone number he claimed in the SIP invite. The authentication server then creates a digitally signed identity token inserts it in the SIP header, and sends it along to Alice's domain. The verification server reaches out to the certificate repository, retrieves the public keys, and then verifies the signature. If the signature verifies, the call is delivered to Alice. If the signature does not verify, the call may still be delivered to Alice, only with a flag, or the call may be dropped, and it really depends on how the policy is set up in the environment. So here is the stir-shaken reference architecture. This is a logical depiction, so actual implementations might vary, and we're also using 3GPP's IMS architecture for purposes of illustration and discussion. The boxes in blue exist today in the IMS, and the boxes in gray are new as a result of stir-shaken. And there's not a lot of IMS in this conversation here, so don't worry about it, but let me take you through the components. So the SIP UA is the user agent and the telephone device through which you make and receive phone calls, or it could be a soft client. The CSIAC, the call session control function, is the routing engine of the IMS and essentially routes calls. The interconnection border gateway is the service provider edge, the NNI or the IP peering point by which service providers peer with other carriers. So that's it for the IMS. And let's take a look at the stir-shaken components. So towards the left, we have the authentication server, which is an application server, and its function is to authenticate the caller as well as sign calls. It has a secure interface to the secure key store, which houses the private keys in the solution. So on the top center, we have the certificate repository, which houses the corresponding public keys. And on the far left, you have the certificate provisioning authority, which is a logical entity that's responsible for generating certificates for the framework. On the right, you have the verification server, which is an application server, and its function is to verify signatures. And next, you have the call validation treatment, CVT, which is an optional component, and it adds additional analytics information in terms of anti-spoofing analytics and the like. And this could be local to the service provider, it could be a third-party service, or it could even be a cloud service. So let me take you through a call flow, and the solution will come together for you. So the SIP UA, or the user agent, initiates a call, creates a SIP invite, inserts a telephone number in it, and sends it to the routing engine of the IMS, the CSIAC. The CSIAC triggers the authentication server. The authentication server requests from the secure key store the private keys associated with the telephone number that was claimed in the SIP header. The authentication server then signs the call and returns it back to the routing engine, the CSIAC, and then the call is routed outbound towards the carrier's edge, towards the egress point, and the ingress point of the terminating service provider through the IBCF, and the call is now routed towards the routing engine on the other side, the CSIAC, which in turn now triggers the verification server. The verification server extracts from the SIP header the URI for the location of the public keys, the certificate repository. It reaches out to the certificate repository, requests the public keys, and then validates the signature. At this point, the optional component, the call validation treatment, might be invoked for additional call analytics information, anti-spoofing, and CVT might also provide treatment information for positive or negative validation of signatures at the verification server. So the additional information is added to the call, and the call is forwarded on to the terminating UA. A media session is set up between the 2 points, and you might have a voice or a video call in progress there. So the magic of stir-shaken happens at the authentication server and the verification server, where a call is signed and a call is verified. So when the verification is successful, it essentially means that you have received a call from the same telephone number at the time it was signed. So you know there was no telephone number spoofing that occurred in that path. So depending on the degree to which a service provider can vouch for a telephone number, different levels of attestation are applied to a call. An attestation is applied at the point a call enters the IP network or originates onto the IP network. So when the service provider has no relationship with the caller or the telephone number, chances are it was the gateway point that the call entered the IP network. So a gateway attestation is applied. When the service provider can validate the caller, but not the telephone number behind, a partial attestation is applied. An example of this would be a trunk group or a PBX, or even call centers where sometimes the call center is authorized to use a business name and a main number, but you cannot see the numbers behind that main number. So at that point, a partial attestation is applied. And when the service provider has a complete authenticated relationship with the caller and the telephone number, a full attestation is applied, and this is the most trusted form of call that comes through on the network. So as security professionals, we know that every solution has security architecture considerations, and STIR/SHAKEN is no different. And in keeping with the Martini theme, I won't serve up a full-course security meal, although when you do implement, you do need to consider every layer of security, the hardware, the infrastructure, the networking application. We need that. But I will be serving up choice security appetizers or key considerations for when you implement STIR/SHAKEN architectures. Robocalling combined with caller ID spoofing and impersonation enables numerous attacks. Vishing, which is phishing over VoIP, FIT, spam over internet telephony, and swatting impersonates callers to emergency services, dispatching them to a specific address. Caller ID spoofing also enables the use of invalid, unallocated numbers such as 000, 000 that we so commonly see on our call displays, and this technique is also used for voicemail hacking. And this is only a sampling of attacks here. So we as a security community, we need to partner with our voice colleagues in this battle against robocalling. Security architectures do vary greatly, and they vary based not only on the technologies that are in place, but they also reflect the risk appetite of an organization, as well as the security maturity of an organization. Another point to note is that STIR/SHAKEN is being tested and trialed, so there may be updates and upgrades that come about as a result. So it's a moving, evolving space, so keep an eye out for any changes. As well, there might be a couple of security items I will speak to that might strike you as basic or fundamental. However, I have seen them overlooked so often in the voice environment that I really feel it's worth the conversation. So the STIR/SHAKEN infrastructure. Again, you will see a diverse set of implementations. And this could be a third-party, off-the-shelf vendor product, or you could use open-source software. You might have a local physical appliance on your network, or you might deploy STIR/SHAKEN on private or even in public clouds. When you go out there and into your environments and go, where is STIR/SHAKEN? I wanted you to know what you were looking for, whether it was a bird, a plane, or a cocktail. And in this case, you could have any of those variations. I wanted to point out that voice is a real-time service, and availability is an important pillar of security for voice services. As such, resiliency, redundancy, and scalability are important architecture considerations, regardless of the type of architecture being deployed for STIR/SHAKEN. And of course, if you're deploying in the cloud, do not forget cloud security principles, and that's a topic for a whole other different talk. Data sensitivity. This is a counterintuitive topic when it comes to the voice environment, but it's an important one nonetheless because it drives security architectures. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard, but Daksha, this is voice services, voice operations. We have no data. Yes, you do, my friend. You have the private keys that need to be kept really secure as they are foundational to the legitimacy of the stir-shaken operations. Then you have customer-related and customer-centric data points such as telephone numbers, caller names, IP addresses, and some of this may need to be treated as PII, and some of this data actually flows in the SIP control layer. Then you have system configurations, infrastructure variables that need to be treated as non-public. And of course, the public keys for stir-shaken that need to be accessed by third parties. All of this would drive architectures, and we need to stay mindful of what data we have, where it is flowing, and this leads us into the topic of security zoning. So if your organization is using the traditional zones model, think about all the components in the stir-shaken solution. The SKS, which is the secure key store that houses the private keys, needs to be placed in nothing less than the most trusted secure zone in your environment. The CSIAC, which is the routing engine, a call routing function in the control plane in the IMS, may be placed in the trusted zone. And for components such as the SDICR, certificate repository that houses certificates, you would factor into its zone's placement that it needs to be accessed by external third parties. Now, if your organization is using the zero trust model, and the zero trust model is a hot topic in the security industry at this point, you might assume a default deny posture, you will apply policies at a granular level, microsegmentation, and you will monitor it through a centralized control plane. The methodology is different. However, you're still considering the security posture for each of the elements of stir-shaken. So here are some of the main protocols used in the stir-shaken solution. SIP, which is Session Initiation Protocol, is an application layer protocol and is used for call session setup, session management, and session teardown. RTP, Real-Time Transport Protocol, is a presentation session layer protocol and is used for the transportation of voice and video over IP. So here's a quick question for you. Does SIP and RTP run over TCP or UDP? I'll give you a second to think up your answer. TCP or UDP? The correct answer is that SIP and RTP can run over both TCP and UDP. However, there is a preference for implementing SIP over TCP as we like reliability in our control signals, and RTP is commonly implemented over UDP because media has better tolerance for packet loss. In the stir-shaken framework, there are lots of calls and keys and certificates that are retrieved over HTTP. So do make sure these protocols are secured using TLS. And if you're using SNMP to manage network elements, do make sure you're using the latest versions, SNMP version 3, basic security hygiene, and do be mindful of the data you're gathering for network management and the data sensitivity around it. Now, SIP protocol standards, as well as SIP appliances, typically support the implementation of SIP over TLS. Surprisingly, SIP over TLS is not very commonly implemented. And in order to protect the data on SIP, which is signaling data, telephone number, caller name, and in the case of stir-shaken, the digitally signed identity token, the use of SIP over TLS is strongly recommended. This would protect against man-in-the-middle attacks and eavesdropping. Similarly, for RTP, the use of SRTP, Secure Real-Time Transport Protocol, would offer confidentiality, integrity, and replay protection. Now, SRTP is not a transport layer protocol. You could still have RTP running over TCP or UDP. It's simply RTP encrypted, and the keys have been exchanged over SIP. Now think about it. If you have implemented SIP without TLS, and you are running SIP in the clear, and you have decided to encrypt the media and you implement SRTP, you are now essentially exchanging keys over SIP in the clear. In this situation, you really haven't got around the problem of man-in-the-middle attack and eavesdropping. So one of the biggest concerns we as security professionals hear when recommending encryption is the impact to performance. And studies show, when comparing jitter and latency between secure and unsecured VoIP, that there is negligible impact to voice quality and throughput. Therefore, it is strongly recommended that SRTP be used in conjunction with SIP over TLS And I recommend going back and looking at the reference architecture, specifically noting the flows of SIP and RTP, and then securing the deployment. So for stir-shaken, governance and certificate management is a big topic. And I will talk about certificate generation piece in this segment, and there's further information in the appendix for your review, but again, it's a big topic. I could not cover it here. So in the Shaken framework, service providers use public and private keys and digital certificates to create and verify signatures. The SCIPA, which is the policy administrator, the box in orange here, acts as a trust anchor in the Shaken ecosystem. STI, of course, stands for Secure Telephone Identity, and that abbreviation flows throughout this presentation. The STIPA designates service providers by issuing them service provider code tokens, allowing them to participate in the STIR-Shaken framework. And once they have a service provider code token, they can participate in authenticating and validating calls. Additionally, the STIPA maintains an up-to-date list of all authorized certificate issuers participating in the STIR-Shaken solution. The STICA acts as the root CA for the STI certificates used to digitally sign and verify telephone calls. So now, to obtain a certificate from the STICA, the service provider generates a public-private key pair. Then it creates a certificate signing request, CSR, and sends it to the certificate authority along with its service provider code token. So this code token will be included in the STI certificate along with the public key. The certificate authority verifies the service provider identity, and if the CA approves the request, it creates a certificate, signs it, and issues it to the service provider. Now keep in mind that the corresponding private key will be used to sign calls, and this signature will find itself in a token, in a SIP invite, and we'll talk about it a little bit further down. Just hold that thought. So some security things here. Key storage, key management is an important topic, and I have additional material for you on this in the appendix as well. And what's worth noting here is that the certificate issued here is not unique to service providers, and they're not issued on a per telephone number basis either. Instead, a certificate contains blocks or sets of telephone numbers, even thousands of them. So this means that when a certificate is used, it can potentially expose telephone numbers that are not relevant to the call in progress for which the certificate was called up, right? So this in turn can lead to privacy issues. So while architecting the solution, keep an eye on the flow of this certificate and be mindful of authentication and secure transit during implementation. So there are several quirky things about the certificates in the STIR-Shaken solution. The calls are not uniquely signed. We just saw that certificates contain blocks and sets of telephone numbers, so that explains that. And the Shaken certificates may be short-lived, and they live for 5 or 10 minutes. So this means that if the private keys are compromised, a bad actor can misuse them only for about 5 or 10 minutes. And since this is a relatively new model, the costing and pricing model for the CA is still being figured out, so there's work in progress here. And then there's discussion underway that perhaps a solution can get around the overhead of using CRLs or OCSPs as the certificates are short-lived. Needless to say that at the time of validating signatures, not only does the signature need to be validated, but we also need to validate that the certificate was from a trusted root CA. Now on to the topic of tokens. And there are several tokens in the STIR-Shaken framework, but I will speak to only a couple of them. The service provider code token is provided by the STIPA or the policy administrator. SPCs are identifiers used to designate service providers and telephone networks, and we just discussed this a little bit earlier. The persona assertion token, or the passport, is used to assert the identity of the calling telephone number and is placed in the SIP header in the invite of a call. Both of these are JSON Web Tokens, or JOTs. And on the screen, there are a couple of JOTs just for you to see what they look like. Now, JOTs are inherently base64 encoded, not to be mistaken for encryption. And JOTs have a facility for digital signatures, which may or may not be applied. Insecure deployments of JOTs can lead to replay attacks, cut and paste attacks, and exposure of sensitive information. So in order to secure this, first, if you can help it, don't put privacy-sensitive information in a JOT. And this may or may not be possible. It really depends on the solution. Sign and encrypt the token in that order. And of course, secure the token in transit. So I would again suggest going back to the stir-shaken reference architecture, this time keeping in mind the tokens that are in the solution, consider the information in the claims, and then applying all the principles that we just discussed to secure them. So when a terminating service provider receives a call, they turn around and reach out to the certificate repository to retrieve the public keys. So this round trip between any two servers in the US is estimated at around 100 milliseconds. So what might you do if you want to reduce this round trip? What might you do if you want to shave off the 100 milliseconds? What might you do to the certificates? You might cache the certificates. So this leads us to an interesting problem here. Because certificates in stir-shaken are short-lived, cache design is a really important concept. Cache freshness, lifecycle management, cache renewal. You need to watch this when you design or the solution will fail. Now, on the incoming side, you have millions of calls coming in to the originating service provider on the service provider end. And because this is a real-time service, you want to rapidly sign these calls and send them on their way. So there is a temptation to extract all the private keys from the secure key store and cache them locally. Now this gets even more interesting. We have been looking at only half of the architecture so far, as in we have been looking at the call flow from service provider A to B, right? But in reality, both service providers have all the components of the solution. Each service provider has an authentication server and a verification server. Essentially, you're looking at two application servers, one caching public keys and one caching private keys. And there is always potential to place them on the same host. So just watch how the solution is designed and place it in such a way to ensure that there is no intermingling of public and private keys. So as we discussed earlier, the telephony technologies landscape is a complex one. And you could have numerous technologies even on a single call flow. Even on an end-to-end SIP call, you have numerous devices and paths, such as the session border controller, the SIP gateways, and the way the SIP protocol is written, the SIP header may be rewritten at every hop. And where did we put the digitally signed identity token for stir-shaken? In the SIP header. So stir-shaken expects a service provider to be able to transport a call from the point of origin through the VoIP network to the endpoint while maintaining the integrity of the SIP header. This means we might need some updates and upgrades to some of the appliances and paths so that the SIP header is maintained intact as it flows through. So there is some work to be done here. On the user agent side, we are now receiving calls that have different levels of attestation of full, partial, and gateway. And this information is useful only if the end device or the client is able to display this, and the consumer is able to make an informed choice on whether to accept a call or to reject it. So there may be, again, some updates and upgrades required so that the call verification status can be displayed on the end device. All this to say that there is work to be done, and as security professionals, we need to partner with our voice colleagues, not only in this battle against robocalling, but also in securing the implementation of stir-shaken. And stir-shaken is no silver bullet. we do need to continue to take a multi-layered approach, continue to use the Do Not Call registry, continue to use applications such as No More Robo, Hiya, Umail, and there's plenty of third-party applications. Sometimes the service provider may also provide specific applications. So these applications typically leverage the simultaneous ring feature of your telephones and maintain blacklists and profiles of robocallers, and they screen the call for you. So when a call comes in and the profile matches, the application hangs up and essentially spares you the interaction with the robocall. And oftentimes, based on the subscriber base of that application, they can see a telephone number coming in and trying to dial out thousands of numbers simultaneously. And if it matches a profile they already have of an illegal robocaller, they are able to see that and block that call as well. For these applications, if you have a smartphone, you can go to your app store, download these applications, or you can go to the application website, put in your service provider name and telephone number, and see what features are available to you. And last and new, we now have STIR/SHAKEN, which is on the service provider side, that provides call authentication and call validation on IP SIP technologies. So now we're adding another layer to all of the elements that we have in order to protect ourselves from illegal robocalling. So STIR/SHAKEN will also kind of strengthen the other call blocking applications as well, because if you have blacklists and caller ID spoofing being used, you could have a resulting set of errors because of that caller ID spoofing. So call authentication and call verification of STIR/SHAKEN will help address some of that mistaken profiling as well. So there will be greater reliability through the other applications as a result. So there's multiple layers of solution coming together to tackle this wider problem. So when this presentation is done and when you go back home or to your office, in the next 30 days, I would like for you to think about what voice technologies you have in place. Are you using TDM? Are you using POTS? Are you using IP SIP? Are you on proprietary protocols? What solutions do you have for addressing robocalls at this time? Do you have contact centers? What's going on in those contact centers? What technologies are there? And of course, this is an active space, and there's lots of standards development work ongoing at this time. So the IPNNI Joint Task Force is actually looking for people. They would love to have more cybersecurity professionals, so please do check it out and join them if you can. A little bit further out in 60 days, consumers, of course, please continue to protect yourselves against illegal robocalls. And I kind of make this distinction because some of the architectures we covered today are service provider architectures, so you might not have direct access or visibility into them. In the enterprise space, as security professionals, connect up with your voice experts, find out what equipment needs updates, to maintain the integrity of the SIP header and things that we were talking about, to support STIR/SHAKEN. And if your service provider is about to give you a level of attestation, at least flows through your network and into your solution. And if you're in the service provider space, find out what your voice colleagues are doing. Find out if you will be going to get a third-party vendor solution for STIR/SHAKEN, or would you be going the open source path? What levels of attestation might you provide customers? And that's a business decision, right, in how you are going to display this to your customer on the customer's call display. For equipment vendors, of course, do find out if your equipment can flow the SIP protocol while maintaining the integrity of the SIP header. And if it does, you might already have a selling feature in your equipment that already supports STIR/SHAKEN upfront. So in the next 90 days and beyond, of course, for consumers, continue to protect yourselves to all the mechanisms we discussed. But since STIR/SHAKEN is expected to be implemented in-year by many carriers, you might start seeing features and flags showing up on your call display, and you might now recognize them for STIR/SHAKEN mechanisms. Or perhaps you might receive an opt-in request from your service provider, and this really depends on how they're operating and managing this. For enterprises, service providers, and equipment vendors, do partner with your voice colleagues. Do find out what they're doing, and of course, share all your security knowledge with them around securing STIR/SHAKEN to ensure safe and secure deployments. So with that, I would bring you to the session summary where we did an overview of the robocalling problem and the related voice crimes. We did a review of the STIR/SHAKEN framework, and we reviewed some security architecture considerations of the STIR/SHAKEN solution. And with that, I bring you to the end of this talk. I want to thank you all very much for your attention, and a quick shout out to all the women in cybersecurity. And I'd like to turn it back to our hosts at CSIAC. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Daksha. It was an interesting presentation, and definitely an area that we're hoping that progress is made in the future. I think most folks in the modern world will agree that the robocalling is a bane of the daily living, and if we can cut down on that, I think a lot of folks would be appreciative. So if you're working on a problem that a lot of folks are hoping for a solution. So thank you for your activities in that endeavor. So I'd would like to address. We've got some questions that have come in from some of our attendees, and I'd like to run those by you and see if you have some comments. So I'll start with a couple that came in before you actually started to get into the STIR/SHAKEN framework and architecture. So these are kind of kind of the existing systems as they are today. So the first person had a question about, wondering about if there were either legal or other differences between robocalling as they come across a landline versus a cell phone. Are there any differences between the medium that it comes across?
Well, there's certainly technical differences in how they come across, and I will steer away from any legal conversations because this is a very regulated space, and I'm sure the legal professionals will talk to that very effectively. And so there's technical differences, but from being a nuisance, I think we see them across the board, both on landlines, cell phones, as well as IP phones. But we're starting to see, as the statistics and we just talked about, right, the majority of it, 50-60% of robocalls are coming in on the IP SIP environments because they're simply easier for them to spoof and play pranks and make mischief on those technologies because it's easy to set up. So there is that tip over, and we're continuing to see that migration away from PSTN onto IP SIP, right? So that's the general trend. So as our technology evolves in that direction, so are our problems evolving in that direction, right? But I think we have better mechanisms to address the problem on the IP SIP because the other technologies have been around for a very long time. They're legacy and they're almost end of life. And it's very difficult to touch those appliances to bring them up to date. It's almost easier to roll out a more robust solution in the IP SIP space.
Okay, thank you for tackling that one. We have another individual was interested in. Once again, this is pre your architecture regarding the call origination. Why can't that be identified as well as the origination network be identified? Is there a reason for that?
Right. So I think this definitely must have come in before we did the architecture because the solution does verify the point of origin of a call, and it signs the call. So the service provider who is accountable for the set or block of numbers that they own, they kind of validate, right? And they provide different levels of attestation. So they are validating the call, the origin, right? The telephone number. It's not the name. It should be clear. It's the telephone number that's being validated, and then it flows through, right? So, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes. Okay. So now the questions, the next questions came in once you got into your the kind of the heart of your research here. So So is there the secure channel between IBCF at either end, and can somebody hack this?
And this is a very, very good question. And I think I would almost pass this one over to our voice industry and our voice experts. From a security standpoint, almost all of us, we like secure connections. The things with the IBCF, now you're talking about the IP peering points and NNIs with service providers, and historically we've had trusted relationships with carriers, right? And this is very well known. And as our world is getting, moving from, outside in threats into insider threats, yes, we all cringe at, what could happen on the inside of a network. We trust our partners, we trust our service providers, and it's all well. But from security hygiene, of course, we would recommend, all those links be encrypted as well. And from a technical standpoint, if you go back and look at the protocols, the IETFs, they're intended to be encrypted and protected as well. It's just that how voice has a priority for operational efficiencies, and it has certainly evolved in the way it is just by way of the service and the technology. I hope that addressed that question.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. We appreciate that. Thanks. So let's see. This next question I think popped up on your slide where you're discussing the various protocols, and the person was just curious as to your slide. Talked about HTTP, and wondering why it wasn't HTTPS.
Definitely HTTPS. I was just pointing out that these are some of the protocols, but secure them, right? And I went through all of them. I said SIP, but the correct secure version of that is SIP over TLS. We did RTP, and to secure that, it was use SRTP, right? For HTTP, it was like use HTTPS, run it over TLS, right? And so forth, and SNMP as well, bring it up to version 3, which is the latest version. So I think it was just the messaging. So definitely HTTPS. Do not even think about HTTP. Forget about that. So no, thank you for that question. If there was any element of doubt. So.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Let's see. We have another question. So it says many networks in some countries still use PSTN and older devices. And then these are used in intermediate networks. So how do those affect security issues, and how would you overcome those challenges?
And I think this is an industry-wide challenge, and it certainly is a pain point for all of us. And I think I addressed in one of the other questions in passing, right? Because these appliances are pretty old, it's kind of difficult to bring them up to date with the security parameters that are current and appropriate. And the technology evolution is also moving that way, right? We're hoping that all of this will drive the push towards IP SIP environments. So we move towards VoIP technologies, which are easier and better to secure and have a better security posture. So that will remain a challenge, and it's very difficult to update that equipment set. So bring it to end of life, migrate over, move to secure platforms would be the way to go. It might not be the answer you want to hear as well, right? So I understand.
Okay.
One of the challenges we live with, yeah.
Right. Thank you. So I guess another question is, what kind of impact would the STIR/SHAKEN architecture have on legitimate uses of caller ID spoofing? Where say doctors' offices or the public or alerts that you mentioned, how, would that negatively affect those type of calls? Actually,
no. So in cases where the originating user, they request that their privacy be be protected, the service provider is now obliged to put in parameters in the SIP invite that honors that requirement, right? And this is where, I don't know if you remember this STIR/SHAKEN architecture. On the far side, we had the CVT, the call validation treatment. So this is a space where that CVT can actually be applied, right, in terms of treatment of how do you treat that display, the very stat parameter that's going to be sent over to the UE. How would you display it to ensure that it honors the point of origin user's requirement or request to stay anonymous, and yet provide a level of attestation that, yes, this is a trusted call, it's coming from where it says so, but we will not display the name because that's the request, right? So there is a treatment mechanism. So the mechanisms are in place. It just needs to be operationalized, tested, and trialed, and made to fine-tuned to work. So it won't affect any of those features that are currently offered as legitimate services.
Okay, well, that's great. That's awesome. And I guess, do you have any kind of sense of how well does or will STIR/SHAKEN actually block unwanted robocalls? Do you have any data on that?
Well, first STIR/SHAKEN doesn't block calls, right? And this is a great point of clarification. STIR/SHAKEN only authenticates and validates the call, so it enhances the trust in the telephone number that's coming in. The decision on whether to take the call or drop the call kind of still lies with the consumer, right? So the consumer receives calls with various levels of trust. It says, we trust this number. This is a gateway call. We don't know this point of origin. Now the consumer can make an informed decision on whether they want to pick up that call based on the level of trust that's shown. So STIR/SHAKEN off its own does not block anything. And some of this accountability might be shifted onto the service provider, and that's a whole dynamic of what the agreement was with the customer, with the parameters, features, what they're allowed to do. So off its own, STIR/SHAKEN does not block. But I also want to bring to attention that STIR/SHAKEN is a layered solution, right? It works well with all the other solutions that we have in place. Like we need to continue using the Do Not Call registry and the other applications as well as STIR/SHAKEN because it's on the carrier side. What I want to point out is STIR/SHAKEN will become effective, and its effectiveness is directly proportional to the number of carriers that start using it. So it'll take a little bit of time and patience for it to roll out because even though your number might come in from a carrier and they haven't yet rolled out STIR/SHAKEN, maybe they're a month away, they may come out with a different level of attestation, right? Because the intermediate carrier who's picking it up might say, oh, I don't know, because it didn't come in with an attestation, right? So over time, as more and more carriers adopt this, we will start seeing much better, robust call validation and verification of the telephone number coming in. So it's going to take a little bit of patience, but we're well on our way, I think, in the industry.
Okay. Well, thanks for that clarification and kind of pointing out the differences there. That's an important point to emphasize. I think that's a key point. So. I think at this time we'll probably wrap things up. But once again, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to spend with us today to share the information on this the work that you're doing. Like I said, I think it's important work, and it's a problem that all of us are dealing with, and we're looking to solutions. So this is like you said, it's a layered approach, a layered defense needs to be taken, and this is another. We appreciate the work you're doing in this area. So
thank you so much, and thank you so much for this opportunity to present and share this from the perspective of a security professional. And I want to thank you all for your hospitality. Great team at CSIAC. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thanks again. And thanks to all our attendees for joining with us today. And we hope to see you at our future webinars down the road. when we'll be sending out an announcement in the near future for our July webinar. We're hoping to have some folks with the U.S. Cybercom. They have an activity called Dreamport, and we're hoping to get them on the schedule, and they can tell you about their facility and the activities they're conducting there. So we'll see you in the future. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.